All right, welcome back to the Tess of the D'Urbervilles discussion group. Today we are talking about chapters 31 through 34, I believe. Before we get started, I thought I'd take a quick poll to see who, like Joseph, our host, cheated and read ahead of the assigned section. Anybody want to confess? Some of you may. All right. Some of you exercised self-control. Now, to be fair, if there's any stopping point in the novel that you want to keep reading, this would probably be the most tempting of all of them. But if you did happen to read ahead, you're going to have to be very careful to limit your comments to what you read in chapters 31 through 34. The other thing, I was just going to tell a quick funny story, Grace, the story that you shared with me, which is that we have a student at VanDamme Academy who is leaving the school after this, her 5th grade year. And her mother, I think, was in conflict about this decision. There were, I think, social and some academic reasons that she wanted to try another school, but she was conscious in some way of things she might be missing out on. So she told Grace yesterday, but it's okay. I downloaded the Read With Me app and I bought her a copy of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And Grace said, stop. No,
I said, wait, please don't. No, that's good for you. For you, please read it. But
so I was having visions of her watching last week's session where I quoted Molly's comments in the chat. Oh boy. So yeah, no, they'll have to wait a few years to pick up.
The 10-year-old can eventually read it in a while.
Yeah. All right. So, oh no, your story, Grace has a story, but it's for next week. Yeah. So chapter 31. I thought for this one, this is one of those chapters where I thought it might be good to just start with what I selected as my title, because it'll help give a framework for this chapter, which has so many different elements I would love to highlight. So I struggle to keep focused on essentials. So this will help me to keep focused on essentials. So originally, the first title I came up with was The Treachery of Silence. Because I viewed this chapter as her being in that state of indecision about whether to tell or not to tell, and the forces that were pulling her in both directions. And then I was listening to it again last night, and there was a phrase within it that I thought was even better, which was spiritual forgetfulness. Yeah. And intellectual remembrance. That's one of those that when I got to it, I'm like, that is the title, as I said about yours. So is that what you
I chose too?
Okay, perfect. So that also captures the wavering between whether to tell or whether not to tell.
Right. And I think she spends most of the chapter feeling like she's not going to, like the letter that she receives in the beginning of the chapter. It says that like she feels like the responsibility has been shifted. Like she doesn't have to tell. Like she can be like, my mommy told me not to.
Right.
I won't.
But that's what I love about the spiritual forgetfulness versus intellectual remembrance, because she's convinced herself that she ought not to tell. But there's still something that's drawing her to confession, and she can't suppress it. And it's always there lurking. What was the phrase? There was something about those really shapes of darkness always spread in the background. So she can't escape it. Okay, so let's just talk about some of the things, some of the reasons she has for withholding this information. So first, there's her mother's advice, which I think reviewing it yesterday has to be about the worst advice anybody has ever given. I mean, not just the whole
consider the source,
not the whole theme of the letter, but the arguments made within it are about the worst arguments a person could make. So let's see. I didn't tell my secrets to your father. That's
Joan Derbyfield, the person you want to be emulating.
Exactly. So that you can get a man like Mr. D'Urberville.
Or John.
Many a woman has had trouble in their time. Why should you trumpet yours when others? Isn't this the opposite of the cliche advice that mothers give, where they say, if everybody jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff too? She said,
But she's
everybody
saying
else,
jump off the cliff.
everybody else jumped off a cliff. Shouldn't you do that too?
Shouldn't you do that too?
Let's see. You know, it's your childish nature to tell all that's in your heart, as if
And that's
that's
bad.
a bad thing. So yeah, it's I feel like this could be used in a lesson on its own as a model of bad advice giving. Okay, but in any case, I like what you highlighted there, that it takes some of the burden of responsibility off of her in her decision making. If my mother is telling me not to, what was the line? Oh, do I have it?
But perhaps her mother was right as to the course to be followed, whatever she might be in her reasons. Silence seemed on the face of it best for her adored one's happiness. Silence it should be. Is that what you mean?
Yes. And there was one that it was like she, the only person who had the right to tell her what she ought to do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Helped her, help take some of the sense of responsibility off of her.
Yeah. Oh yeah, thus steadied is right after the part that I read. Thus steadied by a command from the only person in the world who had any shadow of right to control her action, Tess grew calmer. The responsibility was shifted and her heart was lighter than it had been for weeks. Yeah.
Okay, so there's her mother's advice. Then there's that line, silence seemed on the face of it best for her adored one's happiness. So she persuades herself that for the sake of,
upset.
Yeah, for the sake of Claire, it's the right thing to do. And then they're just the fact, oh gosh, the line about being enveloped in a photosphere.
Yes.
The more absorbed she becomes in her love for Claire, the more she's capable of having that intellectual forgetfulness, the spiritual being absorbed in the present moment, and the intensity of her love makes the other things fade into the background, but they're always still there lurking.
Yeah, what was the line? Like, it might have even been from the next chapter, but something about there being very little of the earth in her love for Claire. Like, it's very...
Now that is in this chapter, the spiritual nature of their love, but the spiritual nature of their love, which is something emphasized repeatedly in these 4 chapters, seems argument to her that she need not tell because Claire is above such concerns in some way.
Above reality, like, like the fact that happened is, well, I don't want to say
is removed from them in some.
Yeah.
Other people would take it as something unforgivable, but their love has this spiritual quality that makes it removed from the animal.
Exactly.
Okay. Other things that you wanted to emphasize in this chapter?
Well, the thing that really stuck out to me in this chapter is kind of obviously her feelings surrounded whether or not she should tell, and the idea that as long as she is just enjoying kind of what you said, their engagement, their love, she's able to kind of divorce that episode of her past, like away from her current situation. But then as soon as she's confronted with real things, like we need to set the date and the feelings of the milkmaids, like things that are right in front of her and real and unavoidable, that's when she feels like those shadows of doom. I'm trying to find the line.
Oh, I have it here.
She knew that they were waiting like wolves just outside the circumscribing light.
Where she walked in brightness, but she knew in the background those shapes of darkness were always spread.
That's it. Yeah.
And also, here's the photosphere. Her affection for him is so beautiful. Her affection for him was now the breath and life of Tess's being. It enveloped her as a photosphere, irradiated her into forgetfulness of her past sorrows, keeping back the gloomy specters that would persist in their attempts to touch her: doubt, fear, moodiness, care, shame. So as long as she can stay enveloped in the photosphere, she can forget. But then when she's confronted with these realities, like the faces of the three girls, then she's drawn back into remembrance of the past and what it means.
Yeah, exactly. So the way that kind of existed in my head as the category is just like the invasion of reality that she can't kind of just think away. The things like setting the date and then the milkmaids are what eventually in the end of this chapter make her realize that she has to tell. And then, of course, she continues to waffle throughout the rest of it.
Yes. So I have a lot of specific lines and elements of this chapter that I would enjoy highlighting, but I thought I'd open it up first to comments from other people. Does anybody else have questions or comments? Shoshana.
Hi, of course, I haven't been here, but did you talk about the sort of the passage in Atlas Shrugged? No, okay, all right. Well, it just sort of jumps right out at me both times. Okay, and this is not deep, but I think it actually does pertain. There's a passage in Atlas Shrugged where this question, the great question of should a woman tell, is mentioned as being a cliche. That's it. And I'll read it to you. I just pulled it up. It's when Dagny is walking around in New York and she's seeing the worst of her culture. And here it is. She walked past a movie theater. Its lights wiped out half a block, leaving only a huge photograph and some letters suspended in blazing midair. The photograph was of a smiling young woman. Looking at her face, one felt the weariness of having seen it for years, even while seeing it for the first time. The letters said, in a momentous drama, giving the answer to the great problem, should a woman tell? Okay, so there it is. And well, I guess what I thought was interesting is that I don't think it feels like a cliche when we're reading it in Tess. Okay, it feels like this is a real thing. While in the movie theater, Dagny walked past, it was everybody asks that question and there's always a boring answer to it. And I thought that was interesting because I think in Tess, it seems very immediate and real, including the fact that it takes her so long to think about it. And meanwhile, without going ahead to what does happen, we think about all the things that could happen. Because obviously the very fact that it's taking her so long to, whenever you have to think a long time, should I do this or that, there's probably a deeper problem behind it, which there is. Yeah. So it's not just about should she tell, it's about her whole experience and can she tell to him and so on. And anyways, as I said, when I looked at, I haven't caught up on the recent things, but for this crowd, I figure people would remember that, might remember that in Atlas Shrugged. And I think it's interesting. It doesn't necessarily mean that Ayn Rand was familiar with Tess, but that she was familiar with the cliche.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's in a different cultural context, it would become more of a cliche, we're going back centuries here, but also it's funny because that does pull me, I feel completely absorbed in the question when I'm reading it. And I feel it feels weighty and it feels frightening, and you're waiting to see how Claire is going to react, and you're feeling sympathy for Tess. But that perspective also pulls me out of it a little bit. And if you step back and look at it from the outside, it does the conflict does seem wrought is the word that comes to mind, that there's in these next few chapters. One of the things Sarah Miller brought up last time was how much of it is, how much of the universe of this novel is distinct to Tess and what she's suffering as a consequence of, the sins of her forefathers or something, and how much of it is the universe per se. And, is this the story of Tess's tragedy, or is it just the tragic universe? And I think it's all of those things. But in these next chapters, so much more superstition came in, and so much more about it seemed to drift a little bit away from a condemnation of society and more to superstition. And so it feels sometimes to me like he's looking for every opportunity to emphasize the tragedy and suspense and dismalness of this situation, and not so much consistency is needed about what the cause of that is. I think we'll have to wait to answer that question, whether there is a single consistent theme, but it feels to me like some of that is a little bit manipulative, I guess, manipulative of my soul. I don't know if I don't know if either Shoshana or Grace, if you share that view, but
I don't know that I do, but I would want to wait
hear. Okay.
to talk more after we've gotten a little bit further.
Okay.
And so many of these interesting questions that you brought up, I've been like, I really want to say this particular thing, but I can't yet.
Now that is the problem of trying to talk about the novel as a whole. So we'll wait.
UN has her hand.
Yen.
Yeah, so I actually Shoshana brought up a really interesting point that I hadn't pinpointed before, and that is because I actually didn't enjoy the book that much. Or actually, no, I enjoyed the book, but then I watched the movie and or one of the versions. I think there's more than one out there. And I found it.
Be careful of spoilers.
I won't. I'm not going to talk about it. I just found it completely trite, like this, and it had that feeling of what she mentioned in Atlas Shrugged, that this is, why does this even matter, right? And I don't, you know, that point is how it comes up to me. Whereas, yes, while I'm reading it, it doesn't feel that way at all. And why? So why is that? So maybe we can talk about that throughout this, right?
Well, I think one of the issues is that you can't have, I don't think you can have Thomas Hardy as a movie. I mean, I think Grace and I both enjoyed watching the film, but I think it's watching it as a recollection or a, you know, visual reality of the novel that we read, but on its own terms. It can't be Thomas Hardy in the form of a film, because so much.
You don't have his words.
You don't, the what?
You don't have his words, like his vocabulary and his sentences are what makes it what it is.
And so what you try to capture visually with a facial expression, you can do that to a certain extent, but you can't capture the nuances and depth and emotional substance of what's happening in that moment. And that's what he's so spectacular at.
There are so many shades that are going to be missing no matter what amazing actress you get or anything like that. There's going to be something missing.
I think there's also the fact that if you think about it as the cliche, should a woman tell, that actually leaves out everything interesting, because the real question here is, should Tess tell Angel Claire?
Right.
Right. You know,
right.
Because, and if in fact it boils down to something that is just, should a woman tell? Because even with her mother, you know, should her mother have told her father and so on, and maybe that'd be a different answer.
Sure.
You know, given what she wanted in that marriage. So I think that it just, for me, it's very interesting that it clearly stands in Atlas Shrugged as, that's a dumb question. And yet it's a dumb question that's been asked many times. And here it doesn't seem like a dumb question of what Tess should do.
No.
And we also know that she's a pure woman, and she's a pure woman in spite of what her culture might think is impurity. And so
I think that the culture aspect of it is really important, and it's
crucial.
Hard to like put our minds in that place. I mean, Thomas Hardy does an amazing job at helping us get there, but you know, so many times throughout history, truly we've seen that this like false purity to this degree of subjugation of our lives to some belief or ideal is a failure. And so the question becomes less and less important over time. So now as we're looking back, like we have to immerse ourselves in this cult. It's a cult like practice that they all lived in, and they all agreed, and they all cared exactly where their baby was buried in the church lot. And it was so important. And like, it's just so difficult for us to put our whole self into that. And yeah, you're right. Like watching a movie about it, it doesn't like pull you in like the cult would pull you in, through this poetry and art. So
okay, so part of it is the poetry and art thing, and part of it is the cultural context. I just taught Le Cid, Corneille's play Le Cid, to my students, and it's a moral question that in a sense they can't relate to at all in this day and age. A question of honor over everything, and having to risk put your romantic life being at odds with your sense of duty and honor. But we can just extrapolate to moral questions. I mean, honestly, what I think, what comes to mind when I say that is we can extrapolate to equivalent moral questions in our day and age. And then my feeling is, do we even have them? I'm sorry for that line of cynicism, but it feels like we've lost, to a certain extent, it's that we've lost the culture of this novel, but to another extent, it's that we've lost the ability to feel this significance of these deep moral questions. Now, that's certainly not true of Ayn Rand, and she's got her own set of moral questions in Atlas Shrugged that are of equal significance. And in that cultural context, this one would not have the same weight. But anyway, going through the agonies of Tess, whether or not we can relate to the specifics of it culturally, is very important for our own personal spiritual growth, I think, for helping us to see that such questions do exist and are important and are something that must be agonized over.
I'm so glad that you said that. I was like trying to figure out how I would say something like that and got nowhere near the clarity that you presented. So I'm really glad that you said it.
Tarsha.
Okay, so I completely agree with the whole being in this cultural universe of the novel, and it has a very different context than our own. But I want to change the topic, if I may. And maybe this is not as significant, but there was a reference in this chapter that I didn't understand, and I wondered if anyone could help point me to it so that I can educate myself, where she's talking about or he's talking about how she had not known that men could be so disinterested, this paragraph. Though not cold-natured, he was rather bright than hot, less Byronic than Shelleyan. And I feel like I'm missing a reference to understand that fully.
I think mine had my version says less darkly romantic and more cerebrally inclined. So reference to the romantic poets, Lord Byron and Percy Shelley. But I think this is the section where I was emphasizing his spiritual form of love as opposed to animal. He was in truth more spiritual than animal. And this is something that was going to come up in later chapters, but it really intensifies the suspense over how Claire is going to react.
Yeah, you get a few little passages that really make you think like, oh God, maybe it's
like
maybe it's gonna be fine and maybe it's not.
Spiritual could mean he's elevated above the specifics of her past and loves her so pure, or it could mean that he's going to be so appalled by her past because it drags him back. It seemed it left me perplexed in that question of how he's going to react.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's probably what Hardy was going for, is to just be like, there are aspects of it that might make it okay. And then there are other aspects that make it maybe not okay. So I think that being perplexed might have been the idea there. But yeah, the less Byronic than Shelleyan, when I think of Byron, I think of just like very like flowery, like love, very flowery language about love and like, I think of acoustic guitars and roses. And then I am not as familiar with Shelleyan works, but if he's like juxtaposing it, I just kind of think of it as the opposite.
Shoshana, did you want to comment on that? I'm sure you
Oh,
have familiarity.
well, I guess there's even a little irony there because both Byron and Shelley had private lives that are, yeah. I mean, Byron and his sister, just saying, and Shelley, you know, running off with Mary while he's still married, and then she takes her own life. So in a way, there's almost a little irony, and they're going to choose between them. Well, both of them,
Yeah,
both of them have issues. On the other hand, you know, Byron is, I think that's correct to say that Byron is sort of darker and passionate, and Shelley's more cerebral. It's harder to read Shelley, and Shelley was more of a, you know, as an atheist, you know, more of an intellectual and a thinker. So there is some difference there, but it's also, if he's going to pick two, you know, yeah, both of them you could say are, well, if they were in this novel, you wouldn't have a question of should a man tell, because everybody knew what they'd been up to. I actually had a different comment. I don't know if you could tell I was thinking when you mentioned Lucide, and you probably know this, maybe even talked about it with the students, but Leonard Peikoff writes very well about this question of what are we going to do with feudal and honor and so on. And he says that he thought up a modern version of Lucide. Yeah, so I guess you could say that there'd be a way of coming up with a modern version of Tess without the same concretes.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I thought it was actually very, very good ideas that he had there about the young woman and the young DA as a transformation of Lucide. So yeah, I think in some ways you have to get to a more abstract level sometimes with the older works and see what's the essence of that. So
yes. And yeah, I mean, the same thing comes up in regard to Antigone and burying her brother. I mean, we have to be able to put ourselves in the cultural context, but also just relate to the moral scope of it. Yes. Can we just relate to that? And then we don't necessarily need to, I mean, it's a fun exercise to try to come up with the modern equivalent, but we can also just absorb ourselves in the question as it's posed in the novel and the struggles that surround it. Okay, I just wanted to I did quote you, Shoshana, from the other discussion group where we were talking about this as saying, you know, Hardy has a great soul, whether how he puts that soul into practice and the themes of his writing is a separate question, but there's a great soul here. So I think part of that is what we're talking about in the kind of nuances of the moral struggle and the kind of nuances of what's established about the culture in which she finds herself. And then there's the poetry aspect of it. So those are the things that would be lost if you tried to turn this into a film. So just quickly on the poetry, since I was struck by the difference between this incredibly beautiful poetic passage. And previously we had made reference to the poem Neutral Tones, which Grace and I both love, which is one of the most dismal poems ever written about reflecting on a love that was completely dead. And so I just was struck by this image of water and the difference between that and Neutral Tones. It says, she put her hand in his, and thus they went on to a place where the reflected sun glared up from the river under a bridge with the molten metallic glow that dazzled their eyes, though the sun itself was hidden by the bridge. They stood still, whereupon little furred and feathered heads popped up from the smooth surface of the water, but finding the disturbing presences had paused and not passed by, they disappeared again. So just this image of, I tend to like anytime Hardy creates hyphenated terms. There are others in these next chapters, but a molten metallic glow that dazzled their eyes. And I just thought that is about as opposite to the Neutral Tones pond as a person could get. So here's the description. We stood by a pond that winter day, and the sun was white as though chidden of God, and a few leaves lay on the starving sod. They had fallen from an ash and were gray. So the life of the little heads popping up, the molten metallic glow, or ash and grayness and a starving sod. And that's just
of God.
Oh God, is the greatest phrase. Anyway, that's the idea that when I read this amazingly evocative description in Thomas Hardy, and it made me recall another description that was its categorical opposite, also by Thomas Hardy. That is part of a reflection of the power of his writing.
Oh yeah, big time. I loved the molten metallic description as well. Whenever he describes like the beauty of nature, I'm always just like,
oh yeah, I know. Okay, we must comment on the little avenging ghosts before we move on. I don't think I will ever have the words to capture what is so charming and charmingly tragic about these three simple souls, but that image of Reddy put her hands upon Tess's shoulders as if to realize her friend's corporeality after such a miracle of being engaged. Oh. And the other two laid their arms round her waist, all looking into her face. And we've all encountered scenes in literature in which someone suppresses their own feelings out of a sense of honor and nobility and dedication and moral strength for the person they love, right? We could probably come up with a long list of those. This is so different from that, and in such a charming way. It's not some like substantive show of moral strength. It's just simple. It's just honest and childlike and simple that, well, he doesn't love us, so we're just going to gaze adoringly at the woman he does love, wishing we. So it's just fascinating to me to think about that difference, that they have this like goodness about them that's a childlike goodness. Yeah, a simple goodness.
Absolutely. And I love that when Marion kisses Tess is like, did you just do that because other lips have touched there by now?
Like kissing the shadow. Was she the one who kissed the shadow? No. Yes. So I find them so unique in literature. I don't know of other characters like them, and I'm so captivated by them.
I'm really glad you said that, because that's true. I love them for that reason as well. Their simple goodness, but I also, now that you mentioned, I'm like, yeah, they are totally unique. At least in my experience, I haven't come across anybody that's like that before. Mm-hmm. And I love them.
Maybe does it have to do with, that theme that we've talked about many times of being more directly connected to human nature as opposed to social conventions, that these girls are just more pure and earnest in their feelings instead of having them be contaminated by, I don't know.
I think so, because you don't get the same type of earnest connection with the characters that she knows anywhere else, like in Marlitt or anything like that. Like it is definitely unique to the Derry. And I think that Dairyman Crick also shares the same sort of earnestness that makes him more lovable, even though he's such a minor character. I think it's in the next chapter or maybe the one after, but when they come walking over and Tess like freaks out, she's like, I wasn't sitting on his knee, and he's like, well, if you hadn't have said anything, I wouldn't have cared. I wouldn't have noticed.
You shouldn't put thoughts into people's head. Yeah.
Just kind of this simple, affectionate side that they all have that seems absent in other areas.
Yes.
Hi, Caleb.
What's your perspective on his capture of women in general? Like, I mean, it's a man writing about women and really deep, intimate thoughts about their, like, I don't know, I'm so entranced by it. And I just wonder, like, from a female perspective, like, if it feels authentic in the way he captured it.
It's funny, we both are like, huh. There's something about the nature of the question. Like I think I just felt so completely sucked right in that I've never stepped outside to ask myself a question. But I guess that is an answer in itself, because
Yeah.
I'm
Totally
completely
absorbed.
absorbed. There's
Yeah,
nothing.
I'm into it.
Yeah, there's nothing that's jarring me out of the story because it feels inauthentic.
Yeah. And this is only tangentially related to what you said, but I've heard a theory out in the world that Thomas Hardy was falling in love with Tess as he was writing this book. And I think that like even if it's not true, like you can see the care with which he's crafted her character, and you can see like that she's like this full person. And I just love the way that he has crafted her. And I feel a personal connection and a love for her. And I like you said, I feel that I haven't ever stepped back to think how I relate to her as a woman.
All right, should we move on to the next chapter?
I'm ready if you are.
Okay, so in chapter 32, the two things, I'll just draw out two themes that stick out to me, but then we can go into whatever details you want. So one is a series of ominous signs. I feel like this is where we start to really fear what's going to happen.
Can I say?
Yes.
The cows are going dry.
The cows are going dry. Those gnats are irradiated with a spark and then snuffed out.
Extinct.
Forever. There's the ballad of the mystic robe that she recalls her mother singing to her and wonders as she's putting on her dress. There's this idea of heaven. All this good fortune may be scourged out of me afterwards by a lot of ill. That's how heaven mostly does.
That's how it does. Yeah.
And then the bands, just, whether or not they've followed proper procedure in the band, there's a little bit of relief afterwards, but it's another one of those moments of apprehension.
But why couldn't I have just had simple bands? And yeah. And even this season, like it's not summer anymore. It's getting colder and
yes, it is. So that was one of the themes for me, is this series of ominous signs. Now, interestingly, in the next chapter, the ominous signs, I think, become even more superstitious. We have more explicitly superstitious signs, but here is just a long series of things that seem to indicate doom ahead.
Yeah, we kind of like, I almost want to call them subtle. They're not totally subtle, but throughout this chapter, we have subtle hints. And then in the next chapter, they become much more, I'll say, heavy-handed.
Explicit signs of doom. So the other thing here that kind of seemed important to me is there's a line later where Angel calls Tess capricious, and she is. I mean, there's a capricious, she's not in a sense, but when it comes down to this big question of ought she to tell or not, the decision is always a capricious one. So there was the decision, there was the sudden decision not to tell and to make up something else as a confession in the previous chapters. And there's the decision to write the letter is capricious. But what it feels to me is it almost, in the universe of this novel, it doesn't much matter what she does. She's just kind of going through the motions anyway, because it's all, heaven has its own agenda with her, and it doesn't much matter what she does. But it's just interesting that every time she makes a decision, it does feel like it's the fervor of a moment and not an actual decision that she's come to in a serious and thoughtful. I mean, she's been thoughtful about it but the decision to act is always a very spontaneous and capricious one.
Based on her feelings in the moment.
Yeah.
Caleb?
Looks like we have some comments.
Yeah, actually, I have a really good point to step in there that has been going on for a long time in this book. There's in chapter 16, there's a quote: "The younger children would gain less from her precepts than they would be damaged by her actions." And then I wrote, is this an indicator of all characters' internal struggle? Every character, every single character, I feel you could make an argument for how they have precepts and their actions are different. So it started with Alec. We were confused about him saying nice things and then doing bad things. And then it just over and over, like every single character, I see that this is clearly a worldview that he holds.
Okay, well, that's connected to what we were just talking about with the maids. I think it's as if there's, I'm picturing it visually, but it's like tight connection with human nature. And then the more you are under the influences of society, and in its many different dimensions, the more disconnected you become from those earnest instincts of good human nature. That's what it feels like to me.
Not because your actions change, but your intentions start to change, right? Like, because you start to build this intention, this proper way, but you still, like, everyone performs in the same way, maybe. Still noodling that, but
I have to think about that. Yeah.
But that intention versus action is really pervasive. I think it comes up later too, but also I wanted to say on your quote, all this good fortune could be scourged out of me by, but then the end of that is the way the world works. And so, like, and then another point of, which I think was maybe in the previous chapter where they were looking at the water, the scene you were describing. And then she sees like what could be the city down below. And then she looks deeper into it and she sees sobbing and anger and crying. And I was just remembering the point you told us to look out for, which is the description of the world. And my argument against, like, oh, she's thinking about where the milk's going, and now I see where the milk's going. It's going to this
all those
terrible people.
sobbing people
who don't know or care where it came from.
Right. Right.
So very dismal.
But
anyway.
So I want to take another comment, but the other thing I have to do here, because I didn't include it in my list, and I think it's the most important as an ominous sign, is we start to see descriptions of the differences in the love of Tess for Claire and Claire for Tess. And I feel like at first, okay, good. I feel like at first it felt like it was mutual and identical. But then we have lines, I don't know if this is the one, let's see, on 244.
He loved her dearly.
He loved her. You want to read that one?
Oh, sure. He loved her dearly, though perhaps rather ideally and fancifully than with the impassioned thoroughness of her feeling for him.
And there's another line in the next chapter that has a similar feeling, that the nature of their love for each other is different, and hers is more
thorough
and thorough.
Yeah. No, those really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
It feels so ominous, and it really just like each time that the difference was explained, I just felt like a stab.
Yana.
I just have a question about Claire. There were a couple of things that were said of him that I thought were very much foreboding of something like ominous again. Tinge of recklessness. And deciding by sentiment versus facts, and I think Wendy raised the same point in the chat. But just like that was something to me. I was, I have to pay attention to this. What's going to happen?
Yeah, this was always how Claire settled practical questions by sentiment, which had nothing to do with them. Yes, well, that's we can add that to along with the gnats to our our set of ominous signs. Okay, I'd also like to take a moment just to relish the poetry, if I could.
Yes. She was
I almost feel like this should be a practice of ours too, aside from the chapter titles, is just pick one line that you're just dazzled by the poetry of it. Yes.
Yeah.
So here's mine. I love it so much that I'm conscious of having to read it well because it's so musical. Tess was now carried along upon the wings of the hours without the sense of a will. The word had been given. the number of the day written down. So, first of all, we get to dwell for a moment in that happiness removed from reality of just being absorbed in her love and having this moment of being able to enjoy looking forward to the wedding. But Tess was now carried along upon the wings of the hours without the sense of a will. I feel carried along on wings in the cadence of that very.
Yes. No, I'm
so beautiful.
It's so beautiful.
Do you have any? Well,
yeah, I have a lot.
Pick
I'm
one
just gonna pick randomly. This one. Okay. So what I love about this one is just the simple image that it captures.
Okay.
And what it like, you can just see that happening and you know what it means when you picture it. It's when they're getting married. At a pause in the service, while they were kneeling together, she unconsciously inclined herself towards him so that her shoulder touched his arm. She had been frightened by a passing thought, and the movement had been automatic to assure herself that he was really there and to fortify her belief that his fidelity would be proof against all things.
Oh.
Just the unconscious shifting of her body just to touch him and know that he's still right there in front of her. Oh,
and it reminds me of that moment in the fields when she was trying to suppress her love for him, and then their shoulders touched, and it's
yes, exactly.
It's the two being inevitably drawn together.
Mm-hmm.
My title for this chapter was "Why Not and Yet Why."
Oh, that's a good one.
Because again, we've got the ominous signs, but also the beautiful connections of love. But the emphasis is, and yet why?
I think if you squint, mine I chose for similar reasons,
okay.
But only if you squint. I chose his fidelity would be proof against all things.
And I just saw that Molly's was a fervor of faith in him. So you're both, but that's interesting because you're both emphasizing the hopefulness of outcome, and mine emphasizing the opposite. Maybe I was very focused on and conscious of that series of ominous signs. I don't know.
Well, when I was choosing mine, my thought was that the chapter is about her, or all of these chapters are really her convincing herself that he's going to stand by her no matter what. And really seeing that from her perspective. So that's why I chose his fidelity would be proof against all things, because that's the thing that she needs to keep reassuring herself of.
Yes. Okay. Any last comments before we move on to 33?
I want to just share one more little line. Claire knew that she loved him. Every curve of her form showed that, but he did not know at that time the full depth of her devotion, its single-mindedness, its meekness, what long suffering it guaranteed, what honesty, what endurance, what good faith.
Okay, so I was thinking that was in the next chapter, but that's the other line.
I hope it wasn't, because if I put it in the wrong chapter.
No, I think you're right. But that was the other one I was thinking of in connection to this establishment of the difference between
their love.
Loves. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the category that really stuck out to me. The growing sense of superstition and ominousness with things that just happen around her that remind her, and then these descriptions of their division. So much of what has been described of them up to this point has been there's the ways in which they're similar, and that's really clear. But now you're starting to see a really important way in which they're very different.
Yes. Okay, so the next chapter, as I suggested already, we get these very explicit, superstitious, ominous signs, such as the coach, and the cock crow, the midday cock crow.
I had to look that up.
It just indicates a changing of the weather in the very fabric of the universe and people's lives.
Well, I looked it up to see if there were any more is it just supposed to be this is doomy,
That's
or
interesting.
are there specific things that it forebodes?
Mhm.
It seems like it's mostly just doomy, but when I could find examples, it seemed like it usually foreboded really bad news or a death.
Okay. Mhm. And then with the coach, she says, does that superstition, do you see the coach when somebody's going to die or you've committed a crime?
You've committed a crime.
Okay, so so there's the superstitious signs, and then this chapter, this is the chapter that makes me forgive those who read ahead, because the building of suspense is so intense that you're dying to know. So first we have the insult. Now the insult, both once again, like Claire's father's story, brings Tess's past in close connection to Claire. So there's that aspect of it, just the crossing of worlds again. But then there's the aspect that he punches the guy. I mean, someone last week said, I hope, in the chat, I think said that they hope he kills Alec. They hope Claire will kill Alec. So on the one hand, it shows that he will come to her defense. On the other hand, it's this uncomfortable crossing of worlds that has not yet crossed. So that built suspense. Then the note slipped under the door. Oh my gosh. The note slipped under the door, reading the signs that she sees in his face afterwards, and then ultimately deciding he never saw it and going back to retrieve it and destroying it.
Yeah.
The conversations about, the conversations about her wanting to make her confession and him saying, no, we must be perfect right now. At least let's enjoy our perfection of this time, which again, on the one hand, makes it seem like it doesn't matter what the confession is. I'm going to love and support you no matter what. And on the other hand, is emphasizing the necessity of their being perfect and pure. You know, that comes up a lot. So you don't know what to make of that.
She has this, you know, understandably, this huge anxiety surrounding this, and that, you know, when you have anxiety, you just want to you want to seek the fastest way possible to make it go away, like just resolve the issue immediately. And so she really just wants to just like rip off the Band-Aid and tell him at that moment, but he's like, no, don't. And like you say, it introduces this kind of this two-sided issue, like maybe it won't matter, or he's also saying that like today has to be perfect, and I can't find solace in either of those answers.
Right. It could go either way. And it looks like that quote that you read was from this chapter.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I didn't see where my chapter division came up in my notes. So I actually told you even the wrong chapter title. My last one was We Could Not Go On Like This Forever.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, because she wanted the engagement that lasted forever.
And then my chapter title for this one was His Fidelity Would Be Proof Against All Things. Sorry about that.
Caleb.
Okay. Superstitious things, I think, like weird things do occur when the rhythm of a farm is broken. So I think like it's like cock crowing at noon. Sometimes it happens because the bird is confused because there's so much different activity. I don't know. That's always interesting to me about how superstitions become more than what they really are. But also, the thing is about when she's like, oh, okay, so you don't want me to tell. We'll just move on. Like, you know, when she tells, it's going to be like, well, it was that? You should have told me that. Like, absolutely. Like, it's just, you can hear it coming. Oh my God, that one was.
Well, this is the same man who said she has as much experience as the flower that opened just that morning.
Bud.
So.
Right.
Yes, it's you.
It just doesn't even occur to him that it's even a possibility.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say about this. I find it interesting.
This is where that quote came from that I read before about her kneeling next to him, So
Oh, it was that too. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
this
That's all
chapter.
right.
Sorry.
That's all right. I could not, I struggled over a chapter title and eventually chose An Afternoon Crow. So once again,
Oh.
I was just very focused on the superstitious signs and what they.
It's hard not to be focused on that when they're just everywhere.
Mhm, mhm.
So I like that title for that reason.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts about this chapter?
I feel like I accidentally already shared them in the previous chapter.
Well,
so.
that was good because it went hand in hand with the other quote. So that's
There's,
totally
yeah, they work. So
any others?
not from me, from any of you.
Oh, somebody pulls out, oh, Molly and Steve, the mental cloud of multicolored idealities. Is that how you would say it?
Mhm.
That was my favorite poetic quote in the chapter. In dressing, she moved about in a mental cloud of many colored idealities, which eclipsed all sinister contingencies by its brightness. That's exquisite, and clearly I was not there with her because I was much more conscious of the doom of this.
Molly and Steve.
Oh, this one's mine. Take it from an ex-Catholic, and it looks like Dale is too. There are a couple of really strong references to Christ's passion at the end of this. Not only the cock crowing 3 times, mirroring Peter denying Christ 3 times, which is when the cock crows in a couple of the evangelist gospels. Peter is asked, "Don't you know him? He's the guy being taken away." And he goes, "Oh no, not me." And then the cock crows after Jesus prophesies this in the Last Supper. So it's a denial of the divine. It's like you don't know what you're seeing. The other one is the kiss, which is Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss. And then Angel is kissing the maids, and they're not aware of it. And we know what's going to happen later with them. So there's all that. I didn't quite know how to form it. Maybe somebody else who's an ex-Catholic too will be able to do something with this, like my sister. But like he didn't quite do it, but there's all these references to things in Christ's passion in this. And it's meant to be, I mean, to me, reading this and knowing all the foreboding to me is like, they just crushed me at the end. I was like, oh my God, this is all my self. So yeah. I don't know where to put those, but he's just lobbing them in there like, one after another. And I don't think it was an accident, the kiss and the passion and the cock crowing and all that. It reads like a gospel passage. I think it's meant to. So I don't know if anybody else would recognize it. That's all.
Good point.
I think, Kathleen, did you?
Oh, I'm Steve's sister, and I have no words of wisdom. I'm sorry, but I agree with you, Stevie. But I don't have any further comment on that.
I would.
It's something I hadn't thought of before, though. Interesting comment.
It's not something that would jump out to me. So
yeah, same.
If it was there, it was lost on me. Not brought up Catholic. There was something else I wanted to say here. I guess we can move to. Well, did we want to say anything about the kisses? I don't. How did it strike you at the time that because we do in the next chapter, we learn what the consequence is, and there's a little bit of an indication of what's going to happen because
it says that the kisses do harm.
It says that the kisses do harm.
Because it like brings up feelings that they were trying to subdue.
If there had, there was no triumph in her glance, as there might have been. If there had, it would have disappeared when she saw how moved the girls all were. The kiss had obviously done harm by awakening feelings they were trying to subdue. I don't know, part of it is it later becomes a prompt for her to confess. There's that plot element of it. It also gives us more shades of their character because part of that earnestness is that their feelings are real. They're not superficial, and they're not acting with conscious nobility and honor to suppress them, but also the depth. It's capturing the depth of the feelings that exist there. And that is part of what prompts her confession.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that like they, in her view, are so much more deserving of Angel than she is. And then, you know, after what happens to them.
And that they're the ones who suffer when she's the one who ought to be suffering.
Right.
Stefan.
I just wanted to say about the kissing. It seemed like it was something that she shouldn't have done. That I felt when I was reading that she shouldn't have taken pity on them because they had overcome their feelings. And it's like, I don't know, I just felt like it was the wrong thing for her to do. I know it was a good intention thing, but it was kind of, I don't know. It's hard for me to explain why I felt that way, but it's almost as if like somebody does something good for you that you didn't ask, and they kind of hold it above your head in a way. They didn't ask for that. And I just thought, I mean, I don't think they should have, I don't know. They killed themselves afterwards, obviously. I don't know if that was, you know, justified, but I don't know. I just thought it was weird that she did that.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I don't think that there was, it says explicitly that she doesn't look, sorry for the weird connection, but I'm reminded of this phrase in 93 where there's 3 little children and the eldest brother tears out pages from a volume and hands them out to his younger siblings. And one of the lines there that struck me that I thought was so clever was that there's a superiority in giving. There's a superiority in generosity. So the big brother, he was generously giving all the best pictures to his little siblings, but it was so he could enjoy being the one above them. But there's no trace of that here with Tess. She's not trying. And I think that's why he even includes the phrase, but she doesn't look back with any sense of, I forget what the words I just read.
Triumph, I think.
No sense of triumph. Or she does pity them, and she feels guilty for being the one who won him, and she wants to offer them something. But I shared your feeling of, oh, this is a bad idea. And it describes him as being clueless about it too, that he had no sense of what he was doing to them.
He was just saying goodbye.
So there does seem to be some more deeper significance here of just people not appreciating. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that, but I did share that apprehension. I think he plants that apprehension in you, but he also makes it clear that Tess was pure in her motives.
For me, there's also a cultural component of the kissing, because in many cultures, any friend, you would kiss them to greet them, kiss them to say goodbye. And so I don't exactly know. And when I'm reading this, I don't know what exactly the significance is at that time in that place. I know that when I went to greet German friends with a kiss, it didn't go over as well as when I greeted French friends with a kiss. And so and these are cheek kisses, I assume. I'm assuming this isn't. Yeah. So I guess for me, I was a little bit, I had mixed feelings, partly because depending on your cultural context, that could be a very kind gesture to show friendship and to breach that divide of, I am this aloof upperclassman who's not willing to even greet you in the polite way that you would greet a friend, or I recognize that you had affections for me and I want to give you a parting gift, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember that the value that was placed on a kiss for these girls up to this moment. Like when they were crossing the river, she was looking at him expectantly, hoping he would kiss her. There's the kissing of the shadow. There's kissing Tess just to live vicariously. The idea of kissing Angel because his lips touched her. So it was just a moment of not appreciating the depth of feeling of these girls. And I really think I think the purpose of it here is for the next scene, that it's going to take on this gravity that's going to emphasize Tess's feeling of undeservingness that's going to prompt her to finally make her confession. I think that's the function it serves in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Stefan.
I wanted to make a comment about Angel because there seems to be a lack of continuity, at least how I conceptualized him, because he seemed to be so thoughtful and intellectual and at least a little bit rebellious and unique in his way of thinking about religion. But then we're getting like these superficialities, like he doesn't recognize that these women are in love with him, or his love for Tess is kind of superficial. It's just kind of, not that it's superficial, but it's a little bit more surface and less thorough.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to notice these things. I think I noticed it, and I don't know if this is just like, I don't know how I approach relationships, but when he was asking her for marriage incessantly, it was kind of like annoying in a way. And I think most women would probably be annoyed by that and put off by that. And I just thought that was a weird character trait. So there was a few things that I don't know. That's all.
I think that in this section, Thomas Hardy kind of introduces this aspect of Angel Clare's character for the first time. We're seeing it pretty much just from, I guess, Tess's perspective before, whereas she, assumes that he loves her just as deeply as she loves him. But in this section is where Thomas Hardy explains for the first time that that's not the case, that they do have, he does love her dearly, but not as thoroughly as she loves him. So I think that, yes, he is introducing an aspect of his character that is not continuous with what we knew before, but rather than it being a lack of continuity, I think it's just understanding another shade of his character that we didn't have before.
Yeah, I agree with that. And interestingly, my copy of the novel, which we've kind of deigned superior, you notice what it lacks. It does not have the subtitle, which is
A Pure Woman.
A Pure Woman. So when there was early on, Joseph, when he had his disastrous Kindle version, I said, it's not even called Tess of the D'Urbervilles, A Pure Woman. They added that in. Well, it's just that my version doesn't have that. But in any case, it's a pure woman. It's not a pure man. So I think this is where we're getting the shades of impurity in Angel's character, but not in Tess's.
Side note, I do think it says it if you open up to the title page on the inside.
I don't think no, I just checked. It doesn't.
Oh, I feel like I remembered seeing it in that version. Oh,
I know. That's why I expected it would, and it doesn't.
And it doesn't. Weird.
No, it's not in here. So, okay. Chapter 34.
Yes.
This scene of the scenes that I've described where it feels so real to me. I have walked in those halls and seen those portraits and felt the presence of the moldy walls of the manorial residence and the jewels reflecting in the firelight. I've seen those jewels reflecting. It's just all in the red, cold glow. There's another hyphenated word that just captured
the red cold.
The red.
He does such amazing things with opposites. He does it throughout the whole thing. Do you remember in the very first section that we read about like the pleasing tortures of being in love for the first time and stuff like that? He always takes these opposite words and puts them together to great effect.
In a way that makes it, that makes it so, I don't know, palpably real. So the suspense had been built up until this scene, and then this scene is just so haunting and captivating.
Yeah,
so
you can imagine the mansion, the scary portraits, and the rain.
The restful dead leaves of the preceding autumn were stirred to irritated resurrection and whirled about unwillingly and tapped against the shutters. It soon began to rain. Try to capture that in a movie. It's just not going to happen. You can't, though. It's like, I'm going to go back to Molly's photograph. where she was trying to capture the play of the light on the leaves. You would think that something that can show you the thing being described would be able to show it to you better than a description. No, but the description is able to get to the essence of the thing in a way that makes it more real than reality. Okay, so I mean, it's not more, it's when you're looking at it yourself, you're looking at it through the lens of its significance. And that's what a movie can't capture. It can't capture that visually, but in words, you can capture the feeling and the significance and the meaning along with the description of the reality.
Right. Yes.
So can we
need the Thomas Hardy lens?
You need the Thomas Hardy lens. Can we talk about the jewels?
Yes.
They're so powerful. And I spent an awful lot of time trying to think about what it is about them that gives, I don't know, such intensity and evocativeness to that scene.
Well, maybe you can help me then, because I see that that's what they do, but I can't describe it.
Okay, well, here's one thing that I found helpful. That doesn't get me all the way to an answer, but I still found it helpful. I was trying to picture scenes in which people wear glittering diamond jewels, or when they're made strikingly beautiful in appearance, where the tone is different. So one that occurred to me is My Fair Lady, when she's dressed for the ball and she comes down in that gown with her exquisite diamond necklace, and you're just dazzled by her. The feeling is just joy and delight and being dazzled by her beauty.
Mm-hmm.
This does not feel like that when she puts on the jewels. So I was like, is there anything else I can think of where it feels not the same as this, but where somebody is dazzlingly beautiful and it makes you cringe?
Yeah.
That's how I felt. You're dazzlingly beautiful, fine feathers make the bird. She's transformed into this. So what the scene that came to my mind was the scene in Gone with the Wind, where she shows up at the party with the red feathers and too much makeup because he's trying to shame her in public. But the door opens and your feeling is, this is so strikingly beautiful and awful at the same time. It's like but it's not the same. It's not the same reason that it's awful, although it's a little bit related, I think. So obviously part of it is she's not the pure milkmaid. She's completely removed from the simple innocence of the farm life. And now she's got she needs to have the low cut dress. And so it's emphasizing her sensuality, and lack of innocence is got to be part of it. It's also, I feel like, connecting her to the mansion and her noble, and her
noble ancestry, which is what got her in trouble in the first place.
Right. So all the superstitions, and it said she looked like those portraits.
Yep.
Those creepy.
He notices the similarities in their form, but he doesn't say it.
Yeah. So it's almost like she's becoming one of the inhabitants of this manor, and
the manor's moldy.
And the moldy manor. I don't know. What else do people have to say about those jewels? I really want to hear.
Yeah, same.
Stefan, your hands up. Was it from before?
And also, as she makes the confession, they wink at him like toads.
Ugh.
The diamonds around her neck wink at him like toads. It's menacing. Okay, Stefan,
Caleb.
Okay.
Yeah, Stefan.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like one of the thoughts that kind of like was a little stingy to me is that like this is she gets dressed up and is wearing these jewels, and this is what she has to wear and look like when she tells him these things. Like, because she put it off for so long, it's this super embarrassing look that, like, oh my God.
It's so removed from that pure, simple farm girl making her confession. Now she is, somebody said, tarting her up. Now she is, the image of the corrupted woman.
Right, and
impure
then
woman.
just
Yeah.
before that, you know, in the earlier part of the chapter when she sees the portrait, and there's a description of these like wicked, you know, it's wickedness that they see in this face, and then oh yeah, it's just like you, you know, like it's just the line connects there, and then yeah, so that it just, if she had said it earlier, if all of this had happened earlier, then she wouldn't be put in this position where it's just so terrible of a time to be able to lay these things out. But
And it's made even more tragic by the fact that she doesn't take, she says that she hopes that the jewels will help her tell the story.
Embolden her.
Say, who are you?
What's that?
Because he'll say, who are you? Like it makes her a different person, and the jewels make her. So she's no longer this sweet peasant girl that he's fallen in love with at the dairy. She'll be this completely transformed, bejeweled.
That's helpful, actually, is that it's going to affect, or I get what you're saying. It's going to affect his reaction.
Yeah, like I wonder if she were dressed like a milkmaid when she told him, if like that would somehow, I don't know, make it easier for him to hear. I don't know.
Still my Tessie.
Tessie.
Tessie, all these tools.
Yeah. More suspense in this chapter, that he says, oh, this was so, it's like tearing your heart in two directions, because he says, I did not mention it because I was afraid of endangering my chance of you, darling, the great prize of my life, my fellowship, I call you. My brother's fellowship was won at his college, mine at Talbothays Dairy. Well, I would not. Okay, so in one breath to call her his fellowship. And then as he makes his confession, I admired spotlessness, even though I could lay no claim to it, and hated impurity as I do now. Whatever one may think of plenary inspiration, one must heartily subscribe to these words of Paul. Be thou an example in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity. So like, she's his fellowship. It is crucially important to him that one be an example in purity. What is he going to say?
Even though he's not.
Even though he's not.
Can I also highlight the thing that he thinks to himself? Do I realize solemnly enough how utterly and irretrievably this little womanly thing is the creature of my good or bad faith and fortune? I think not. I think I could not, unless I were a woman myself. What I am in worldly estate, she is. What I become, she must become. What I cannot be, she cannot be. And shall I ever neglect her or hurt her or even forget to consider her? God forbid such a crime.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. Okay. So her fate, her future, her well-being is in his hands.
Mm-hmm. And if I should ever forget that, God forbid such a crime.
Mm-hmm.
So what I cannot be, she cannot be. And he admits in this chapter that he is impure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like, though, I also like the emphasis there that I'm trying to figure out how to say it exactly, and it's something we'll come back to, I know. But that her purity is not sufficient for her to thrive in reality. It's at the mercy of the forces around her. And that's specifically the lot of a woman, is what it seems to be suggesting here, is that
unless I were a woman myself, yeah.
Unless I'm a woman. And he's responsible for what happens, the consequences to her in life. in a way that she, as a woman, she can't be on her own. She's at their mercy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And did you catch that it says she would pay to the uttermost farthing? Like what Alex said.
Oh, did he say that?
Yeah, in that chapter where he is like, why must you be everlastingly flinging it in my face? I will pay to the uttermost farthing.
Oh, God. Oh, that gives me chills. No, I had not made the connection of that phrasing, but I'm sure since everybody could see on the page that
the woman
next chapter is called The Woman Pays, the next section, The Woman Pays.
That is what I titled that chapter, by the way. She would pay to the uttermost farthing.
Because it's not saying she will necessarily, although the next section is called The Woman Pays, but that she would.
She would. Well, because she's kind of like, she feels pushed into it because of Reddy trying to kill herself, Marion getting insanely drunk, and then seems kind of okay, but is clearly feeling very
but that's something,
and she puts that on herself,
yeah,
and she will pay for it.
Yeah, just like she had to pay, just like she had to pay for the dead horse, right? Those are burdens she has to take on.
Yeah.
Caleb.
Yeah, so another aspect of intentions versus actions is, Clara says, oh, what happened to these ladies? But they bid us goodbye. They wished us well. Like, how did they take this turn when they said everything was going to be cool?
That seems different from I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't yet been quite able to conceptualize the way you're thinking of intentions versus actions, because before I was thinking of it as kind of Angel's mouthing of societal standards that he's absorbed at odds with his real kind of natural instincts. That's what, but this seems different from that.
It seems the same to me, because I mean, it's just kind of like you're doing the thing that society expects, even if you're at turmoil, like they don't want to put the turmoil onto this happy couple by saying, oh no, I can't accept a kiss from you, it'll kill me. They just go through it. And
so in that moment, he's more looking at the conventions on the surface than he is the reality of what's underneath. Okay, yeah, I get it now.
So but anyways, that's how I'm connecting it in my mind.
Yeah.
And then there's another, maybe a little bit lighter part. I did like he wanted to use her plate and her knife. Which was also like, kind of this playful, I'm married now and we are one, we're together, while she's dreading this, like in this such a dark place, he's like having these romantic cutesy feelings.
Right.
I thought that
related to that, this scene really hurt to read. The place having been rather hastily prepared for them, they washed their hands in one basin. Claire touched hers under the water. Well, that ought to be the most romantic of scenes, right? Which are my fingers and which are yours, he said, looking up. They are very much mixed. They're all yours, said she, very prettily, and endeavored to be gayer than she was. So the answer is so romantic and so beautiful, and not what she feels in that moment at all.
Which is another reason why the movie version could never be.
Could never be. You wouldn't get the subtleties of what's going on inside of them, because then it gets even more complicated. It says he had not been displeased with her thoughtfulness on such an occasion. So he loves that response. That means everything to him. It was what every sensible woman would show, but Tess knew that she had been thoughtful to excess and struggled against it.
She's like, I'm overthinking it.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that was really beautiful.
That scene is tortured. That whole scene is tortured as you wait to see what's going to happen.
Yeah. And he can like sense that she's not feeling as excited as he is. He's like, why? I wonder.
All right. Next assignment.
All right.
Next assignment is chapters 35 to 40.
Chapters 35 to 40.
And I will have to confer with you, Grace, on schedule, because I have coming up shortly my eldest daughter's wedding on June 25th. I think I might still be able to have this discussion the morning after the wedding, but I'd like to think that over carefully. And then I have a conference in DC after that too. I think everything will work out for scheduling, but just be forewarned that there may be a session or two that I need to postpone for very good reasons.
Super good reasons.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. Always
Thank you
a
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Happy summer.